Hello, hello. I am so excited today. This podcast has been a long time coming.
Okay.
Rescheduled just because of the busyness of a mother and what it means to raise two children. So I'm really looking forward to talking with my guest today. Her name is Elena. She works with HA specifically, helping to guide women back into their cycles. So, here to talk to us today all about it is Elena. Hello, how are you?
Hi. Yeah, very good. Thanks so much for having me here. Such an honor. I've been having guesting in a podcast on my vision board for a while. So this is great. This is great. Looking forward to going deeper into conversation about HA.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you're here today and we were able to find a time for this because I think it's such an important conversation. Before we dive into the nitty gritty details of all about HA, my listeners love to know a little bit about who you are and what brought you into this field. So let's talk a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I am a period recovery coach. So I help women who have hypothalamic amenorrhea or HA to get their periods back, step back into fertility, so they can conceive naturally, get pregnant naturally, without assisted fertility, so IVF, the needles. And I'm sure we're going to dive into HA in a lot more detail, but just so you know, HA is the loss of your period due to undereating and or overtraining and or high levels of chronic stress or all of the above. And like many other therapists and practitioners, this work stems from my own story and experience of HA, healing from HA, getting my period back, and naturally conceiving two beautiful daughters. In terms of my background, I have a science background. So I originally moved to the UK when I was 18 from Italy to study biomedical science as my first degree, then specialized in cognitive neuroscience and went on doing a few years in science research, looking into what happens in our brains when we make decisions around food. So my interest in food was always there. I then went into science teaching. So I retrained as a science teacher in secondary school. So I was teaching all of the sciences, biology, chemistry, and physics up to A levels, which is basically 18 years old here in the UK. And also worked in public health, young people's mental health, and more recently retrained as a nutritionist with a personalized nutrition postgraduate diploma and a personalized dietary education certificate. And I'm also a yoga teacher, certified yoga teacher in Ashtanga. So yeah, many different jobs and many different experiences when it comes to working. But I like to think that all of this kind of previous trainings, qualifications, studying experiences, all come back into the work that I do with my HA clients. And I'm sure we're going to dive into this as well. So that's a bit about my background. But if we dive a little bit more into my own story of HA, I'll try to be as concise as possible. The story is quite long, so I'm going to try to be summarizing it and to give it to you in a chronological order, because it's only until recently, actually, that I've been able to put all of the pieces together to realize what exactly went on in my life to cause the loss of my period and me staying without period for so long. So as a young person, I've always been super into sport. So that's the first thing to be said. At the very young age of 5 or 6, I don't remember, I started sailing as I was growing up. I started doing it more competitively. Things picked up. I was really good at it. I was sailing for the national team and traveling the world to compete in the European and World Championships. So it was kind of a big deal. I was training several times a week in water, rain or shine, summer, winter, everything in between. And I loved it. It's been one of the best experiences in my life. Traveling the world, seeing places, meeting so many passionate young people from different cultures, and of course getting so many awards and feeling excellent at something I truly loved was incredible. However, it didn't come without cost, and I now realize that. Although I didn't feel stressed at the time, I know now I was under a lot of pressure growing up. Not just to perform and stay focused on my racing all year long, but also to juggle it all with school and getting good grades. And of course, I'm a type A woman. I'm a recovering perfectionist. So everything I did, I wanted to do it at top speed and getting the best results I could possibly get. Now, no regrets, of course, but I know this likely had an impact on my period health. In fact, I didn't get my first period until I was 17, and this would be defined as primary amenorrhea. But doctors didn't seem concerned and pointed out that there could be a genetic factor at play because my older sister also had a late menarche. But truth to be told, she was also a sailor and doing sports competitively. So when I did get my period seemed healthy and regular for a while. Until at 19, I decided to leave Italy and move to London to begin my degree in biomedical science. This was a massive life change, as you can imagine. I moved somewhere I have never been to. I didn't speak English really well, had to make new friends. And most importantly, I had to do a lot of catching up, studying-wise, because I was coming from a humanities school where I studied literature and Greek and Latin and art. So I had no clue what a molecule was. So I remember all these intense all-nighters at the library, drinking coffee and Diet Coke throughout the night, 10 exams in 8 days, very poor diet, lots of drinking and going out, the typical freshers lifestyle. Not ideal. So I soon started experiencing symptoms. My period went for good. I started having breakouts and I was like, well, acne at 20, my first year of uni, this is not good. So my sleep was also pretty bad all over the place. And I ran to the GP, I remember that day. And of course, I was prescribed the contraceptive pill. And I still remember this kind of vivid blue package. For those of you who have been on the pill, you might remember the Yasmin. So, of course, I went straight on it and I loved it. My skin cleared up almost within 24 hours. I didn't have to worry about periods anymore or contraception, happy days. So I loved it so much that I stayed on it 2, 3, 5, 8, 10 years. And after graduating and getting my master's in neuroscience, I moved to Australia to work in research. And I met my current partner, Tommy, traveled loads and had the best time in my life. But I was still on the pill then. Then I moved to Glasgow and my partner followed after a few months in Scotland. That itself was a big shock, of course, in terms of weather, changing of hemisphere, lifestyle, etc. And after a couple of years, we actually escaped the crazy weather and settled in Brighton, where we currently are. And we were both working, we got a cat, started thinking about trying for a baby. And I always had this goal, right, of becoming a mom before 30. I don't know exactly why, but I remember having this conversation with my partner and saying, okay, I'll stop the pill, but we need to be really careful as it might happen really quickly. So obviously, what a fool. I had no idea that throughout all these years, all I did was masking my HA and my period loss by taking the pill and getting this kind of fake withdrawal bleed every month that made me feel like my reproductive system was healthy again. But here we go. My period did not come back after stopping the pill. And after a good few months waiting, this was during COVID as well. So you can imagine feeling quite frustrated and getting seen wasn't as, easy as normal. But I managed to get to see the GP for some blood tests and everything came back normal. So my hormone levels were kind of within range, but indicative of follicular phase, aka low. Nothing to worry about, they said to me. And of course, now I know that those hormones levels were obviously not indicative of follicular phase because I had no period. So there was no phases of the cycle going on. But anyway, I pushed for a referral to the endocrinologist as I wanted more tests done. And soon after that, I received a diagnosis of polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, on the basis of irregular cycles, polycystic ovaries on ultrasound. And I was sent back with two main recommendations: exercising more and eating less carbs. Now, the rationale was to manage insulin resistance, which really never showed up on my test results. But of course, being a good girl and coming from a family where my dad is a doctor and blindly trusting what the medical system had to say to me, I didn't ask any questions. I trusted these changes would kind of like help me manage my PCOS, presume PCOS, and restore my period. I'm like taking a breather here because I get so annoyed with myself still for not having asked those questions. Even with a science background, I was not able to question what the doctors were prescribing me and telling me. Anyway, at the time, I was already pretty active. So that's the thing, right? Nobody's asked me any questions about my diet, about my lifestyle, about my relationship with food, about my stress levels before making this diagnosis, which is pretty wild. So I was already pretty active. I was training to be an Ashtanga yoga teacher and practicing every day. I was also eating super clean and experimenting with veganism, vegetarianism. So lots of colorful veg, eating the rainbow was at the top of my priorities. But apparently it wasn't enough. So I started going overboard. I started practicing twice a day, sweaty, dynamic yoga sessions. I was teaching my first classes on top. I was walking 15K steps a day. I was pacing everywhere. I never really took any public transport. I cut down carbohydrates, so no more pasta, no more bread, no more pizza on the menu. And let me tell you, for an Italian, that was, huge. After a few months of following these recommendations, of course, I did not get my period back. I started experiencing even worse symptoms because I was getting injured way too often on the mat. I was feeling cold all the bloody time, like I was freezing, no matter how many layers my hands and feet were always freezing. My hair started falling off, and for those of you who know me, that's the time where I got my first buzz cut. And I told everyone that was for style, but in fact, it was something I did because my hair was shedding so bad. I ran straight back to the endocrinologist. No explanations, no more questions, no more testing whatsoever. I was told I could go back on the pill, or if having a baby was a priority, which clearly was, my only option would be to go down the IVF route. And I remember feeling teary at that visit. But sure, I wanted a baby, so I agreed for the referral. Then 1 month had gone by. I felt all of the emotions whatsoever. I felt broken. I felt like my body was broken and wondered, why me? I'm doing everything right. I'm eating super healthy. I'm strong and fit. I have the best body I've ever had. Literally was the first time I could ever see my abs on the mirror. Why am I not able to cycle? And then the day of my first IVF consultation arrived, and after all the info overload, I went back home and closed my eyes, then opened them again and felt like this is not it. So yeah, I felt angry, upset, dismissed, that I wasn't given the tools to heal naturally. I was only 29 at the time, so I figured there must be another way. I've got good egg reserve. My AMH levels were fine. So yeah, after years of trusting the medical system so hard without truly advocating for my own health, despite being a scientist myself, I said, that's enough. So that's when I started doing my own research. I started analyzing my own results, history, symptoms, lifestyle, from really taking an outside perspective. And soon realized, it didn't take me long to realize my picture did not really fit the PCOS profile, but instead I could be dealing with something called FHA, functional hypothalamic amenorrhea. I had never heard of it. But research article after research article, I saw myself into pretty much all aspects of HA. Under eating, tick. Over exercising, tick. Chronic stress, mega tick. Most importantly, everything I'd been doing to manage my PCOS, everything I'd been prescribed to do in the last years or in the last year or so, so eating less and exercising more, I realized that most likely worsened my HA. So I felt very furious, but also empowered with the knowledge and determined to get to the bottom of it. So I started looking for a practitioner specialized in HA, realized was a rare species, and I found an NT and jumped straight on a call with her. I love what she said. She had a super personalized approach. I loved the vibe. So it was a no-brainer for me. I made the investment straight away, paid in full, and started working with her the week after. And I'm sure we're going to be talking about what I did, specifically to get my period back. Please be reminded that we're also unique. But so what worked for me might not be what you need to heal and recover yourself. But in terms of nutrition, I'm just going to give you a little flavor here. In terms of nutrition, testing revealed I had quite a few nutritional deficiencies, likely as a consequence of eating little and being on the pill for 10 plus years. Because yes, the pill depletes you of nutrients. So I need to really address this via diet and supplementation. Crucially, after years of restriction and cutting off carbs, I needed to relearn what a nourishing meal looked like, what it actually looked like on the plate. I learned to focus on quality, not quantity. So how to provide all of the right nutrients in the right amount for me, for my body to thrive and feel safe again. And to do so, I focus on nutrient density. And with this knowledge, I also worked on kind of reconnected to my bodily cues of hunger and fullness, which I'd kind of lost touch with after years of strategizing about food and eating with my mind rather than my body. And naturally, I had to decrease exercise frequency and intensity. However, even more importantly, I had to change the mindset I brought into my workouts. So I learned a new way of practicing embodied yoga, which taught me how to listen to my body properly and really practice what felt good on that moment, on that day, on that week, in the present, for joy and not to, earn calories or distress. And of course, there was other things I worked on: my environment, my toxic load, boundaries, reconnection with nature, the outdoors. I got a puppy. But if I had to pinpoint two areas that made the most difference for me were aligned nourishment and intuitive movement. These were my life changers. So you bet within 1.5 months or 1.5 months of implementing these changes consistently with a lot of motivation and working on my personalized protocol, I got my first recovery period. So yeah, after 12 years of amenorrhea, you can imagine, I cried, I laughed, I was hysterical, couldn't believe I was bleeding, like what the hell. So I kept going, didn't change a single thing. Sure, period 2 arrived, then my third period, and suddenly the weight gain, the bigger sized jeans, the mental struggle, the fear of being judged were all so worth it. And then on my fourth recovery cycle, I fell pregnant with Nora. A successful and healthy pregnancy. She's now 3.5 years old toddler, and I also have an 8-month-old baby right now. So yeah, this is the story that led me where I am today. So empowering women to heal from HA, reclaim their periods and flow into fertility. And I pour all of me into this work, all of the trainings, qualifications, skills, but most importantly, my own story of HA, with all the ups and downs, mistakes, fuck-ups, lessons learned. So it's pure magic, and I'm so excited to be, doing this work and supporting more women in the future. So yeah, that's me.
What a powerful, beautiful, vulnerable story, and grateful you were able to recover and research and figure out how to bring it back because you're helping a lot of women do the same. And of course, not every woman's story is the same in how they can bring it back. And some women do suffer with long term hypothalamic amenorrhea. But it is incredible to have someone at least that they can be seen by, heard, feel, and validated, because that's a huge part of healing. Just to dive into functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, can you describe exactly what it is and what's happening in the body as feedback loops?
Absolutely. So yes, hypothalamic amenorrhea basically happens when the brain's control center, which is called the hypothalamus, senses that the body doesn't have enough energy or safety to support reproduction. In other words, ovulation. So the hypothalamus is, if you like, you can think about it as the body's operation manager, right? It helps coordinate not only hormones, but also metabolism, stress, and the menstrual cycle. Helpful way to understand like this is thinking about a low battery phone. Low energy availability is like your phone running at low battery mode. So the phone still works, it's still running, but it starts shutting down non-essential functions to conserve the battery. Maybe it's shutting down some apps, some background work that it was doing. And in the body, that battery, that charge is energy from food. And if you're eating too little, if you're exercising a lot or under chronic stress, bear in mind, most women that I see have got all of this together. They don't only underfuel, they don't only overexercise, they do it all together, and often they're under a lot of stress as well. There isn't enough energy left to run everything. So the hypothalamus switches into conservation mode, survival mode, whatever you want to call it. And hormonally, this is what kind of is going on. The first signal that the hypothalamus is reducing is called GnRH, a hormone released in pulses that tells the rest of the reproductive system to stay active. So when this hormone pulses slow, or even worse, they stop, what happens is that luteinizing hormone, LH, and follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, from the pituitary drop. Then the ovaries produce less estrogen as a result. And as a result of that, ovulation stops. Your periods go, they disappear. But there is one very important thing to say is that there is nothing anatomically wrong with your uterus or your ovaries. This is not an anatomical disorder. It's a functional disorder. These organs, your ovaries, are simply not receiving the green light from the brain. There is something to be said about stress as well, because stress has got such an important role in this, because it amplifies this whole process essentially. When the brain perceives threat, whether it's from underfueling or overtraining or psychological stress or all of the three together, it prioritizes survival hormones instead. So that means that your cortisol, your stress hormone, rises, stress signaling becomes dominant, and your reproductive signaling becomes less important. So from the brain's perspective, if you like, stress plus low energy means now it is not safe to reproduce. It's not safe to get pregnant. It is not safe to have a baby. And to be like holistic, when we look at hypothalamic amenorrhea, reproduction isn't the only system that's affected by this. Just the phone doesn't only dim the screen, for example. The body doesn't only switch off the menstrual cycle. In low energy mode, low energy availability, the hypothalamus also downgrades thyroid activity, slowing metabolism.
Sense the hands and feet being really cold as a signal.
That's it. Almost every woman I see, they always complain about feeling freezing all the time. And that's why it's so frustrating that subclinical hypothyroidism is often dismissed, not even looked at, because it's not seen as part of the problem. Then digestion gets slowed down as well. That's why many women present with like complaints of bloatedness, digestive issues. They don't absorb the nutrients from the food they eat very well, so they come with like low nutritional status. Then bone building is effective, of course, increasing the risk of long-term fractures, osteopenia, down the line osteoporosis as well. Immune function is suppressed, so you might get sick more often. Your cognitive flexibility and your mood regulation are affected. So this contributes to anxiety, rigidity, wanting to control everything, foot noise, etc. But the big news is the positive news of all this is that the changes are adaptive. So they're not pathological. They help the body survive, if you like, this perceived famine, this perceived scarcity of food. And just if we use that metaphor of the phone still, just like a phone needs more than just a quick charge to exit that low power mode, the brain needs consistent energy, rest, and reduced stress over time. And when the hypothalamus senses that battery is staying full for a prolonged period of time, we're not talking about weeks, months, we're talking about like an extended period of time, that GnRH pulse will resume, your estrogen rises, your cycles will return, other systems gradually come back online. HA is not your body failing. That's the main message. It's actually the brain trying to conserve power until it believes that the safety has truly returned. Training really helps women because it helps them understand that recovery takes time. It's not just about eating one more pasta dish or taking down one workout. It's about consistent nourishment, resting, and lowering stress consistently.
So signaling to the body that it's a safe place to reproduce. I want to talk about the labs because I think it'd be really interesting for women to have that empowerment in what to look for in terms of numbers.
Sure. So there is something to be said at the beginning, I think, which is every woman with HA is different from the next. So it's really important to analyze blood test results in the context of individual lifestyle, diet, relationship with food, environment, stress levels. And that said, there are trends that we typically see in women with HA, which help us make a diagnosis, a correct diagnosis. But again, it's really, really important to analyze blood test results in the context of lifestyle, diet, stress levels, etc., not in isolation. So in terms of blood test results, what we typically see hormonally is low or low to normal luteinizing hormone LH, low or low to normal FSH, low estradiol, your estrogen. Now, these are not zero, they're not catastrophic, they are just suppressed. It's the brain quietly saying, now it's not the time to have a baby. Also, often LH is especially low relative to FSH, and the normal pulsatile pattern is typically flattened as well. Then in terms of thyroid, this is typically considered normal. This is something that we could talk about forever. I see a lot of women who come to me with subclinical hypothyroidism, and they're told that it's fine because the thyroid is typically not considered part of the picture when it comes to HA, where in fact it's a very important piece of the picture. Thyroid labs are another place HA shows up essentially, and common findings include normal TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, low or low to normal T3. Sometimes we see elevated reverse T3, and this reflects an energy conserving state. Again, like I was telling before, the body is deliberately slowing down metabolism, not because the thyroid is broken, but because the fuel is low, it's scarce. Then we got our stress hormones. Your cortisol is often high normal or elevated, especially in the morning when it shouldn't be, with a flattened or dysregulated daily rhythm, which you might be able to see through a functional test like the Dutch hormone test. And this aligns really well with a nervous system that's stuck in vigilance, essentially, rather than recovery. There is other metabolic and nutritional signals that can be considered, not necessarily something that your GP would be running. So other labs that might be low or borderline could be leptin, reflecting low energy availability. Your insulin might be quite low, especially if you're a very super active woman. IGF-1, which reflects suppressed growth and repair signaling. Again, none of this scream disease. They pretty much whisper adaptation. Now, what's important to emphasize really, is one of the biggest misconceptions in HA, is that HA requires abnormal labs across the board, right? Whereas in reality, many women with HA are told their labs are fine, that their hormones are indicative of a follicular phase of their cycle, when they have no cycle whatsoever and no phase to be considered. Or that they just need to wait it out. Or that stress is the issue without addressing fuel, rest, diet, etc. But HA, we said it before, it's not a failure of the ovaries of the uterus, it's the brain-mediating energy conservation response. And the hopeful part is that as energy availability improves and stays consistent, LH resumes, the LH pulsatility resumes, estradiol rises, your thyroid conversion normalizes, your cortisol settles, your leptin increases, and cycles return. Which is why blood work in HA does not point to a broken system. It points to a system that's doing exactly what it was designed to do under a state of perceived threat. And this framing alone is so incredibly relieving for the women hearing it, I hope. So yeah, that's pretty much the pattern that I see in HA.
I would love to talk to you about your movement because you were helping your nervous system replenish. How did you shift your movement to help your nervous system regulate?
As I learned about HA, I guess I naturally reevaluated the effect of exercise on the female physiology and hormone function. And what I believed to be needed in order to bring my period back was actually keeping it going. So that was the first kind of like realization. I also needed to really appreciate the importance of matching your lifestyle, including your exercise habits with fueling and nourishment. And I did quickly realize the match wasn't there for me, like at all. But most importantly, I think I had to zoom out and recognize the why behind the movement and the practices that I was, doing in my life. And everybody always thinks about yoga as a chill, like Zen practice, right? It calms the nervous system, do yoga if you want to de-stress. But I realize it's the mindset you bring on the mat that is really determining whether or not that is true.
As well as the breath that you're breathing through the practice. It's really, And that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah. The breath is so important. It changes everything. But also Ashtanga, that's what I trained in and that's what I was practicing. Ashtanga yoga is actually a rather taxing practice for the body. There is, believe it or not, there is lots of repetitive movements, lots of chaturangas, the same sequence over and over. It's very taxing for the body. But for me, it was the realization I was practicing to keep sane, to de-stress, for discipline, to keep fit, to be strong, to keep my weight in check once I received the diagnosis of PCOS. To perform those funky transitions. Like I was obsessed with head and handstands and I was like posting them on IG and receiving lots of positive comments about it. And I was complimenting on my body. I probably was the first time I was even able to see my abs. Like I was really practicing from a place of restriction, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say. A place of restriction and performance, definitely not regulation and balance. And when I realized that, pressure dropped because gradually, but slowly and gradually, movement became more like a conversation with my body rather than performance. And I know, of course, I did what's required in HA recovery, which is what I tell all my clients. It's about lowering intensity and lowering frequency of your exercise. But I guess more was no longer better and movement became something that I did with my nervous system, not, I guess, to it. Rest started sneaking into the plan and felt like it no longer felt like failure or laziness. And that's when I entered the world of embodied yoga. So my body became less like a machine, if you like, and more like an instrument that I needed to tune. And I didn't have to push all the time. Dare I say, I started feeling joy from movement, which I hadn't for a long time. And it all had different flavor, less fireworks, less funky handstands, more like warmth and more like a conversation with my body, like a mind. And the question shifted. Before, I was always asking myself, what sequence should I practice? Like the primary, the intermediate, the advanced, Ashtanga series. And then I was asking, what do I need today to come back to my body? Present. And of course, there is a whole returning to the feminine energy. That's something I speak to clients a lot. Literally bringing prana, energy, blood flow to parts of my body that pretty much felt stagnant for a long time. My pelvis, my womb, my lower back. And that's why I teach embodied yoga as part of my work with women with HA. And I use it as a practice to regulate the nervous system, to reestablish a connection with our bodies and their present needs, which, by the way, change week by week, month by month, but even day by day. And even within the same practice, sometimes we start feeling like we want softness. But as we go along the practice, we start feeling that actually I want some strength. And it's beautiful to be able to be flexible and respond to your body's cues and use your wisdom and intuition, which in HA is often lost. And of course, reignite our feminine energy and promote fertility. So constantly checking in with my body and asking those questions is something that didn't just help me recover and get my period back. It's a practice I carried on during pregnancy, postpartum, motherhood. I still practice embodied yoga. So it's such a beautiful practice that shapes around you and your needs and the phase you're at in your life as a woman.
I love that. I love that you're teaching women and you've taught yourself how to be embodied. I feel like intuition is one of our superpowers as women. And because a lot of women are taught more to really live outside of their body, it's the first thing that goes. And it's so nice when we start connecting with ourselves and we can really bring back and grow that intuition that helps us guide that embodied presence with ourselves. So it's such an incredible practice to teach and to really feel in yourself to help you maneuver through the day-to-day. You spoke when we had first had a conversation, you were talking about your neuroscience background and you were talking to me about how you were studying anorexia. And I think that's so interesting in someone that was told to not eat carbs and how that can really affect women, especially if there's no intake about what you're actually eating. And so, can we just dive into the neuroscience background and maybe what surprised you most about how the female brain responds to restriction and how that affects the cycle?
Yeah. So, yeah, like yourself, I have a background in cognitive neuroscience. I did my master's here in Brighton, actually. That's the whole reason I came back to Brighton eventually, because I knew it. I studied here at University of Sussex. And with that background, what surprised me the most wasn't how fragile the brain is under restriction when we underfuel and restrict ourselves. It was how adaptive it is, how strategic it becomes, and how, most importantly, I think women will appreciate this, how reversible many of those changes are once the threat is removed out of the picture. So when we talk about hypothalamic amenorrhea or eating disorders, because I have a background in research around eating disorders, not here in Brighton, but at the University of Glasgow, and I was looking at what happens in our brain when we make decisions about food, and there was a lot of literature reviews and studying that gone into what happens in the normal brain versus what happens in the brain of women who have an eating disorder, specifically anorexia nervosa. So when we talk about HA or eating disorders in women who chronically underfuel and overtrain, we usually focus on the body, right? We talk about weight, hormones, bones, periods, but one of the most effective organs is really front and center. It's the brain. And once you understand how the brain responds to low energy and chronic stress, it completely reframes this from a problem of discipline to a problem of physiology and survival. And here's the kind of starting point. The brain uses about 20% of your daily energy, even though it's only around 2% of your body weight. So it's an incredibly expensive tissue. It doesn't like surprises either. it really doesn't like scarcity and low energy availability. So when energy intake stays low and the physical output, your exercise, stays high, the brain doesn't just sit there and suffer. It adapts. And it adapts from a point of view of anatomy and function. What happens to the brain structurally, so anatomically, one of the first things that surprised me was from the research is that from brain scans like MRIs, etc., they show, especially in people with anorexia nervosa, reduced gray matter, especially in the prefrontal cortex, which is the area involved in judgment, decision-making, flexibility. Then there is also reduced white matter integrity, meaning basically that communication between brain regions is slowed down. And then also, some studies show that there is an increased cerebrospinal fluid, which basically tells us the brain itself is taking up less space.
You said increased cerebral spinal fluid?
Increased cerebrospinal fluid. I guess this sounds scary. I don't know about you, but when I was first reading, it's very scary, especially for women who are living that reality. But there is an important part that's hopeful. And this is not like widespread neuronal death. Like the brain isn't being destroyed or anything. What's mostly happening is dehydration, basically shrinkage of support cells like glial cells and reduction in synaptic connection, so the connection between neurons, essentially. And I often describe it like a house that's gone into energy saving mode, or again, that phone that is in low battery mode. The lights are dim, perhaps some rooms are closed off, but the structure is still there. And there is longitudinal studies to show that when nutrition is restored, when we actually start renourishing our bodies effectively, and this nourishment is maintained over time, the brain volume largely rebounds. The gray matter in the prefrontal cortex comes back online. And this is particularly fast the younger you are. In adolescents, there is good evidence to show that this kind of reshaping of the brain happens extremely fast, whereas in adults, it happens more slowly, but it still happens. So structurally, the brain is pretty resilient. Now, how the brain function changes, this is extremely important. It's all about reward and anxiety. So this is where things really start to make sense when you think about the function and how the function changes in the brain of people who restrict. So if you think about a well-nourished brain, you've got the ventral striatum and the nucleus accumbens that activate in response to food. Then dopamine kicks in, which reinforces that eating is actually rewarding. And then rest feels safe and movement feels good, but optional. And this picture is drastically different in people who chronically underfuel. This whole wiring flips, and there is functional MRI studies to show that food cues activate the amygdala, which is the part of your brain that detects fear, threat. So at the same time, also restriction and exercise activate the reward circuits instead. So when someone says, I feel calmer if I don't eat, or I exercise because it quiets my mind, it's not a personality trait. It's not lack of insight. It's literally your reward system. It's been rewired by months, years of starvation.
Yeah. And I would love to ask, so estrogen essentially activates the dopamine pathways. And so if someone is constantly being told by doctors or just by people that they trust and listen to blindly that you have to stop eating and these restrictions happen during certain phases, can this create, how do I say this? Can this create deeper, almost like grooved pathways where the reward system is lighting up and so it creates a deeper restriction for food?
Yeah, it doesn't quite work like that, but you are onto something. I think basically the hormones get this vicious cycle deeper. Okay, so they lock the brain into stress mode, right? So underfueling and overtraining change hormones in ways that directly affect the brain. So, for example, leptin drops, which impairs safety signaling and cognitive flexibility, like our ability to make decisions, to deliberate, basically. cortisol, we talked about this, rises, and this strengthens fear and anxiety circuits, especially in the amygdala. And then estrogen falls, as you said, and this matters because estrogen supports serotonin signaling and dopamine regulation and synaptic plasticity as well. And it does in areas like the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. So the combined effect is a brain basically that's more anxious, less regulated, and less able to form new connections. So in other words, the brain is stuck in survival mode, and it's also losing the tools it needs to adapt. What does this mean for recovery, I guess, is the next question. And it's the most important point because all of these changes are largely reversible, even the functional ones. But again, they reverse with consistent nourishment and reduce stress, not willpower. It's all about adequate nourishment, rest, and reducing and improving stress resilience. With adequate fuel, the prefrontal cortex activity increases, the reward circuits kind of recalibrate, the hormones that support brain repair come back online, neuroplasticity returns, so the ability of the brain to reshape itself. And that plasticity is what makes recovery therapy, if we're talking about anorexia and eating disorders, effective again.
What I'm hearing is that, of course, everything is adaptable. So what we create, we can reverse. And what we reverse, we can create. One of the pathways is to talk about it, is to use your voice to say what's going on. And so you are listened to, you are witnessed, and so that you can change your behavior. Because if we suppress what we're feeling and what we're doing, then there's no support, there's no network, there's nothing that we can actually, we can't take the step forward almost. We can try with all of our might, but like you said, it's not about willpower. It's really about having the right team in place to help support you so that you can support yourself. So thank you for saying how do you change that and what is in recovery for just the loop that we become part of.
I just wanted to say on the back of what you said about recovery, I guess all of these kind of functional changes highlight the fact that recovery might feel really slow. And I think it's really important to highlight this because one thing that's really important to normalize is that the brain heals more slowly than the body does. So someone can restore their weight, they can eat more and exercise less for 1 to 3 months, and maybe they might get their period back, but still feel really afraid of food, compelled to exercise, like rigid in their thinking. So that doesn't mean that recovery isn't working. It just means that the brain takes longer to feel safe than the body does. And it means that the brain is still learning that the food is safe, that rest is allowed. Each meal, each rest day, each interruption of this compulsive exercise loop is like sending the same message, the same safety signal over and over to our nervous system that we are not starving anymore, that it's safe to reproduce, that it's safe to have a baby. And that takes time. And I think it's really important to highlight that because often people ask me, how long does it take for me to get my period back? It might be quite fast for you to get your period back. And that's why my program, which is all about bringing your period back, is 3 months long, because I have the proof that you can bring your period back in 3 months, even less sometimes, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, depending on, obviously, every woman is different. But one thing is period recovery, and one thing is healing, repairing your relationship with food. Getting your brain to feel safe takes quite a long time. And it's about brain rewiring. That's why it takes a long time, because the brain doesn't rewire overnight. We need consistency, repetition, and doing basically over and over what your HA brain is telling you not to do.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for reiterating that point and making sure people understand that it's not a fast process. These are slow. Every change is just an increment to making lasting changes in your life. And I'm on that point, I would love to talk about coming off birth control. So the brain adapts slowly. So when we come off birth control, it might take 2 to 3 months for the brain to feel the effect. And so people think, oh, I came off birth control, I feel great, everything's fine, nothing has happened. And then all of a sudden, 2 to 3 months later, they're feeling the effects. Can you explain that process?
And I wish more people knew about this. The pill is not just bringing up a fake bleed every month. It's doing actually quite literally harm to your body when you're taking it long term, especially long term. From a nutritional standpoint, there is a lot of nutritional depletions that go on when you are on the pill. So a lot of minerals and vitamins are depleted after you take it, especially if you've been on for 12 years. Naturally, when you come off it, it's not just a matter of getting your reproductive system back on. By the way, if you had HA before you took the pill just masked it. When you come off it, you've got exactly the same issues going on, and they will manifest perhaps even more strongly when you come off the pill. So it will take a long time to bring on your ovulation again. And it will only happen if you nourish your body fully, if you honor your body with rest, etc., etc. But also from a nutritional standpoint, you really need to make sure you understand how your body has reacted to 12 years of taking the pill. You need to investigate perhaps if you've got any nutritional deficiencies, because that might require a specific recovery plan for yourself. And that's why personalized support is really important, because not everyone reacts in the same way to taking the pill. And I had several nutritional deficiencies. You can't really tell whether it's from low nutrient absorption, from slowed down digestion due to HA, or whether it's from the pill depleting certain nutrients, or a combination of both, most likely. But that explains why your body doesn't just instantly switch back on once you quit. And that's why a lot of women are tricked into thinking that once you stop the pill, you'll be pregnant straight away. But in fact, it really isn't the case in most cases. And it really is valuable to investigate what really is going on in terms of nutritional status, in terms of hormonal profile, in terms of even the test that I mentioned earlier about toxic load. There is so many facets of the problem that need to be investigated to understand what your root cause of period loss is. And it's very personal from woman to woman. So yeah, one size fits all advice online. It's not open because we're all so unique and so different.
So much for saying that. I think it's so important for every woman, every person to hear that what makes us the same is that we're all so different. And I think it's a beautiful way of just validating everyone in that way. And I think what this podcast is doing is validating women on so many things that they already feel and know inside of their body. And they're like, oh yeah, it is me, or this, I feel this way. So thank you so much for saying everything that you're saying. For the women listening who haven't had their periods in months or years, what would be the advice? What's the first doorway back into safety and recovery?
That is a good question. I'm answering this question from my point of view because, again, the doorway to recovery is individual. The first kind of advice that I'd give you, any woman who's missing their periods and want to get their periods back and heal from HA, is do not wait to be ready for recovery. And I write quite a bit about this on my social media because I see it over and over in women wanting to get their period back, but they're like, oh, I need to wait to overcome my fears before I even start a nutritional protocol or start eating more or moving less or whatever. I need to overcome my fear of gaining weight before I start recovery. And the thing is, you don't. You need to do this thing. You need to enter recovery, even if you're scared, but you need to do it anyway, because your brain needs to experience what you're scared of and realize that it's actually okay. Nothing catastrophic happens when you do put on some weight, when you do eat the croissant, when you do ditch the gym membership, and when you do go for a walk instead of a HIIT workout. Like, it is safe. The thing is, you can't gain confidence first and recover second. Like, you need to start sending those safety signals for your brain to start feeling safe. And that's when true recovery can take place. And this is far from easy. I don't want to downgrade it to something that's easy to do. It's easier said than done. Like, from the brain perspective, from the brain point of view, these are not small acts. Like, they're loud safety signals, and it's very normal for you to feel very uncomfortable sending these safety signals.
You're rewiring your brain essentially. So it's very scary. You're changing all habits.
Yeah, if it felt normal, there would be something wrong. Yeah, it's normal if it feels terrifying at first. Early recovery, I always say this to women, like it doesn't feel calm because the brain is still running on your old wiring. The amygdala, the part of your brain that detects threat and fear, is really loud. Habit circuits are strong. Like you basically go living in autopilot. Being able to make decisions and being flexible, especially around food and exercise, are really poor. But that doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It means that you are doing something new. And if you haven't had a period for months or even years, I'd say the first doorway back into safety is not mindset work, even though it's extremely important, or supplements, or finding the perfect plan. It's about energy availability. From a brain perspective, safety begins when we said that the nervous system gets a very consistent message like food is coming in, energy is staying in, we're not burning it all off. And that means eating enough of the right nutrients as well. And that's where the personalized piece comes in. So, of course, the macros are important, the carbs, the healthy fats, almost all of the things that we've been restricting need to be reintroduced. Eating regularly every 2-3 hours is really important. Properly fueling movement is key. Initially, any type of movement, even a trip to the supermarket, even a light walk with your dog, even functional movement needs to be properly fueled before and after. Eating in a way that isn't immediately followed by compensation, resisting the urge to work off the calories straight away. We need to send signals of abundance to our brain, like consistently over and over. And then a word about nutrient density, which nobody talks about in the HA, almost no one is talking about in the HA space. It's not just about 2,500 calories. It's not a magic number. Quality is just as important as quantity. So again, every woman has different requirements, possible deficiencies. For most women with HA, the brain has learned that food is temporary and movement is mandatory. So it's really important to break that pairing. And that might look like eating a full meal and not going for the gym afterwards, adding energy-dense foods. Often these are your fear foods that you've been restricting, even when they're uncomfortable. Taking real rest days. With my clients, we always go for 3 to begin with. 3 non-negotiable rest days. And when we talk about rest days, I'm not talking about light workouts or yoga or Pilates. It's literally rest. We allow functional movement. If you need to grab something at the supermarket, you're allowed to walk there, but we're talking full rest. And if we're able to do these things, even if they don't come natural to us, we might have to literally force ourselves most of the time. These safety signals are often enough to switch our reproductive hormones back on, to restart ovulation. And this can be relatively quick, as I said, depending on the baseline. Where did we start from? What level of depletion are we working on? Were we on the pill for 12 years? How about fat percentage and weight? That is a factor as well, although I'd love to talk about the fact that HA is not about weight. But our period will come back, and it's in itself a tricky territory to be in, because we think, oh, we've done it. We've got our period back. Great. Now we can go back to exercising. We can go back to Zumba. We can go back to eating less carbs, eating less frequently. We are fine. But this is where it can go terribly wrong and relapse can happen. When you get your period back, it's really important to keep doing what you're doing. And my last protocol with clients after the 3 months mark, perhaps they've had 1-2 periods, is always like the most important, because I need to convince them to keep doing what they've been doing. Not perfectly, perhaps not with confidence, because they might still not be confident about eating that much, just consistently. Will start feeling safe again. Your brain will take a little bit longer. It will happen eventually. That's when brain rewiring takes place through healing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving such a robust answer. And there's so many pathways through. And so thank you for giving multiple and many different explanations of them. I think it's incredible to have this type of information. I think so many people, it is the awareness piece. When we look at society and cultural pressures, it's a lot about the skinny woman, the woman that looks a certain way. And so, of course, if that's the education that we're given, it's hard to rewire the brain. And so I wish this type of education existed as a cultural norm and not vice versa. So women wouldn't exhaust themselves and run themselves depleted. So they cannot use their voice, they cannot feel their body, their intuition is gone. They just want to push. Long answer to say thank you so much for being so robust with your answers and giving such beautiful explanations as to the how, the why, and also the length of time it really does take and how painful it could be to rewire the brain. And so often I hear so many women saying, I'm scared. And when they're scared, they just turn away from things, and how important it is to not bypass the fear, but talk about the fear so that you can work towards healing. If someone wanted to work with you, to join your programs, where's the best place to find you?
I guess Instagram will be the best place. I currently work with women in one way only, which makes things easier. I work with women in a one-to-one personalized coaching program, which is currently 3 months, thinking to extend it to 4 months. So yeah, supporting them to reclaim their period and step back into fertility. But I just wanted to say this is a unique program where we co-craft. We talked about how personalized this work is. We co-craft a step-to-step recovery plan that's tailored to you. So we talked about your hormones, your genes, your environment, your lifestyle, your mindset, your belief systems, and we really tailor it to you. So no more one size fits all advice online, no more trying to copy someone else's recovery plan from Reddit. I've been there. Spending lots of money on supplements and hormone hacks, an evidence-based plan made for you. And the ingredients that I used drove from my background and my experience having had HA. So we use personalized nutrition, movement coaching, so embodied yoga, that's where it fits, mindset work and brain rewiring and system practices. So yeah, my evidence-based framework is called WORM. And it's the same framework I used and my clients have used to get their periods back. So people can find me on Instagram. My handle is Amenorrhea. I'd love to see you there. I share a lot of evidence-based tips and content on missing periods, HA, and recovery. And if you're interested in working with me, just slide a DM and send me a DM, and we can have a 1 hour, which is longer than typical, 1 hour chemistry call where I really want to have the space to hear your story about HA and a bit about your background, and I can tell you all about what it's like to work with me, and we can together see whether it's a vibe working together. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, incredible. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. This has been a pleasure. Thank you.